Lesley Law and Lesley Grant Law, both two beloved Ride IQ coaches, of course. You guys know the laws, but just to keep with tradition, I will say Lesley is a British individual Olympic gold medalist, and the other Lesley is a Canadian 5-star event rider, and they're both two of our favorite people, and we're excited about tonight. We know you guys are excited about tonight based on how many questions we got ahead of time. The topic is cross-country schooling, which is not a topic that we have tackled yet, but it's a topic that a lot of questions have come in on. So we're going to get into all of it. And if you're here live, as always, feel free to ask questions as you have them or just say hello. So we can just have a fun hour of learning more about all of the ins and outs of cross-country schooling, how to do it right, how to do it wrong, and everything that goes along with it. So Lesley and Lesley, thanks for taking the time to teach us about this tonight.
Thank you. We're so happy to be here, as always.
So I was thinking we could start just by hearing about kind of what your day-to-day is like these days. Are you guys totally wrapped up with the show season? Are things winding down? What's life like over at the farm in Ocala right now?
Well, it's winding down certainly. I do have one more event left at Rocking Horse in 2 weeks' time. So I got a number of the younger horses going there to have a run before they have a little vacation. So the older horses are already out and having their vacation now, quite honestly. So it is a little bit easier, that's for sure.
And then do any of these vacations correspond with a vacation for you? Do you ever get a week off of riding, or do they none of them overlap?
Well, I'll let Lesley answer that one.
Not really, because while the competitions are slowing down, unfortunately, like nothing else has slowed down. So actually, we've already started getting people in for the winter. So, you know, we've got 3 new horses in already, and it's not even Thanksgiving yet, but they're in. And we've been doing a lot of traveling. Lesley was at Tryon. I've been to Ireland twice and Canada once and working. And, you know, so the teaching is very much still full on, even though we have less to ride. We've been selling a ton of horses. So we have maybe less to ride at the moment because of the sales and because of horse vacations. But our day, as far as how much work we do, hasn't really changed because of people coming in for the winter. But that's good. It's a great problem to have, and we love people, so it's fun anyways.
It is a good problem to have. Are those people who primarily you guys are training their horses and they'll come in now and then for lessons, or are they boarding, mostly riding their horses, then taking lessons with you guys, or all of the above?
We get a bit of both, really. I mean, we have some very good not necessarily young riders, but younger, like say university, college people, that they will fly back and forth, and we ride the horses when they're not here, and then they fly back and forth. But the majority are here when the horses come. They're here for the season.
Yeah, well, that's nice. So one question before we jump into proper questions is, being British and Canadian, does anything happen for Thanksgiving in your household, or does it go back?
Because in Canada we have Thanksgiving just like you guys do, but it's a month earlier, which I've got to say is better, because then you separate your holidays a bit more. That's the one thing I like more about Canadian Thanksgiving, but otherwise it's exactly the same. And of course, I grew up with a huge Thanksgiving. My mom did an amazing job. And so now I've carried that on, and we usually have 10 or 12 people here for Thanksgiving every time. So yeah, I pick up the turkey tomorrow.
Does Canadian Thanksgiving entail the same traditions as American?
It's exactly the same. It's just a month earlier.
That's so interesting that both countries adopted the same like food and tradition, but I totally agree with you. The back-to-back holidays is a little bit much in this country. So Yeah, I like the timing of the Canadian one a little bit better. All right. Well, with that, Kins, maybe I'll hand it over to you and you can kick off questions for the laws that we got ahead of time.
Perfect. Well, the topic that we're tackling tonight is cross-country schooling, and there's no one better to cover this than you guys, so we really appreciate you offering to share your expertise. So the first question I think that would help to like a broader question is, how often are you guys taking your horses cross-country schooling, and how does that differ depending on the level of the horse?
Well, yeah, I think exactly. It depends on the level of the horse, quite honestly. The younger horses, they obviously have to get they're learning, so they have to go they go more frequently. They've got a lot more to learn. And then the older horses, they really, once the season starts, I don't usually take them very often, quite honestly, unless I feel there was, I did a competition and the horse was a little bit lacking confidence at a type of fence, in which case maybe it was the water, maybe it was the ditch or something like that. And so, I would take those for a school before they have to go out again, and just make sure they're feeling good about themselves and confident with that type of question. But so those older horses, they wouldn't really go an awful lot from between competitions. I mean, we have, we can set up all the technical types of questions that we think we might encounter on a cross country course, and like some of them might just have a little tune up there through some narrow fences, corners type of thing. But that's normally all they require. And then obviously the younger horses, it depends. I mean, I think they do go much more often. And again, it depends again whether they're, how often they go depends on exactly what I'm asking of them. If they're looking to move up, again, they probably have to go a little bit more often, type of thing, to make sure you're covering all your bases, and they understand the questions that are going to be asked of them in moving up from one level to the next. And I think, I was only thinking about it the other day, how it's, well, for me, how it's changed throughout my career, quite honestly. I mean, way back when, I mean, we hardly, quite honestly, went cross country schooling. We would go, we would take the horses hunting during the winter, and then we would come out for the eventing season. And quite honestly, your events at the beginning of the year was almost your schooling ground. And we used the events differently way back then, in that we used them really to get ready for whatever 3 days we were preparing for, and the actual competitions were actually much more your schooling ground. Whereas today, we do a lot more schooling than I ever used to. So, and it goes back. I mean, every horse is different. If you have a very, if you've got a bold, brave horse, that horse doesn't really need to do an awful lot. And if you've got a horse that's, a little bit spooky, or much greener, then obviously they have to do it more frequently.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So when you say more frequently, and sorry if this is like a hard question to answer because it's a general question about a very specific thing, but when you say more frequently, are you saying like a green horse that's going modified or below? Are they cross country schooling like once a week, or is that not quite that much?
Well, I mean, as I was saying, we do have, what I would call portable cross country fences at home here. Um, so I'd probably play around over those once a week. And then obviously for the more harder fences, like things like water fences, banks, things like that, we don't have that on our property, so we have to go off property to school that. I would say we're probably, the younger horses probably have to see that once every 2 to 3 weeks. Um, because they need to get comfortable with water, they need to get comfortable with banks. But all the technical stuff we can cover here at home. And I would say, the younger horses probably have a pop round our fences once a week, once every 10 days.
Put it this way, it's hard because um, it does, like for us, we're very lucky in Florida and we have places very close to us. But in saying that, it's still an effort. You got to put the horses on the van, you got to take them there, it still takes time. If we had, for example, John Holling's property, we probably would be, if I had a young horse, I'd be trotting out there every week and trotting off banks and trotting through water and trotting over ditches. I think if you have that at your disposal, yes, we'd be doing it every week, because in a very non-stressful way and more of a playful way, because I think that's very good for the young horses to get out there and be able to relax and just trot around that and see everything and be doing it. Unfortunately, for a lot of people, or when I lived in Canada, it was a really big effort because you might have to drive an hour to get somewhere. And then you get there, and because it's such an effort, you feel pressure to do everything in that moment. And then you end up maybe overdoing it, or maybe, frazzling them mentally. And then the next time they have to go out of the box. And so it's, if you had it in your backyard, you'd love to be able to trot around and pop them over it weekly. But like Lesley said, we don't have that, but we're very lucky. We have Jump for Joy portables, which are so easy. I can make them tiny or I can make them big. I can make them anything from novice to advanced. So we can go pop them over some of that stuff. But I guess to answer, we do it more frequently. If we had everything in our backyard, those horses would be trotting through water once a week or walking through water multiple times a week. But yeah, we do, everyone has to, I guess, work with what they've got, kind of thing.
Totally.
Yeah,
Go
I'd
ahead.
actually say, going back, like what I was saying there, like I would still use the early events as schooling as well. I mean, the young horses, the horses that are coming out to do like, training and modified, and even some of the younger prelim horses, I use those early competitions as a schooling ground. I'm not a great person for, like, you see these competitions where they're schooling cross country the day before, before the competition, and because especially at the unrecognized events, they have cross country schooling on the course the day before the competition, and to me that that makes no sense at all, because I want to go to the competition and I want to find out what homework do I have. I want to take them out there in that competition, give them a good score, good confident ride, and come away from that competition and go, okay, this horse was really good at these fences, a little bit green at these fences, so I need to spend some time at this, or I need to spend time at that. And I think, that's, maybe it's a little bit old fashioned, but I want to know where I am in my training with my horses, and I think that's the only way you find out.
It makes logical sense to me. And Lesley, I'm glad that you mentioned about people who might put a lot of pressure on these schooling days because it's a big lift to get there, whether it's the drive or there's just not enough time to do it often. And so there's hype and pressure and a lot crammed into one day. If that's a scenario that someone's in, which I think more of our members than not probably find themselves in a scenario like that. Is there like a kind of like a mental state you should have at the outset of that sort of schooling day in terms of like, these are the things that I want to make sure that I'm true to? Like, this should definitely be, I should end before both of us are feeling like overmatched, or I should feel like every part of it's a positive experience. Or, I mean, obviously those are things you would aim for, but is there anything to kind of help guide people away from putting too much pressure and cramming too much into one day? Maybe like just 3 different exercises or things you're focusing on. I don't know what road you could go down to kind of help guide people on days like that.
Well, I think when you go cross country schooling, you've got to have a beginning, middle, and end. And I think if you have that in mind, then you should achieve what you want to achieve without overdoing it. And so obviously, like when I take the horses there, obviously first you got to warm them up, and they've got to be warmed up sufficiently so that the muscles are all warmed up, the legs are warmed up, and ready to do what you're going to ask of them. And then the beginning of the session then is really just starting them out, jumping some single fences, getting them just going forward and jumping some nice single fences with confidence. And then the middle obviously is, why are you there? What are you there to actually achieve with that horse? Is it corners? Is it ditches? Is it water? And I mean, at the end of the day, that could involve all of those things, but in moderation. Because if you overdo it, the horse is only going to get tired, and then they don't enjoy it. So you got to know what you want. I think the middle is probably the most important part. What you want on that day? What are you trying to achieve? And then obviously the end, and that's making sure the horses at the end of it, the horses are feeling good. Make sure you finish on a good note, even if you have to make it less than what you really went there to do. But it's important to finish, make sure the horses finish on a good note, so that they go away feeling like they've accomplished something. But like Lesley said, without sort of feeling like they've gone to war type of thing. And then obviously, it's, as we said with the warm up, it's extremely important that they're cooled out properly after all of that.
Absolutely. So we just got a great question in chat, and they're asking, do you have any recommendations on ways to fake cross-country jumps in an arena or pasture? That could be with, like, you mentioned jumps for joy or show jumps. She's saying, my closest cross-country schooling venue is an hour and a half away, and I definitely need to start working my youngster over cross-country type fences more.
Yeah, so we have a bunch actually. So if you can afford it, the best thing is the jump for joy jumps. I mean, they're just incredible. And although, yes, they're expensive, they're actually not expensive for what they are. I mean, they last forever. They're 100% durable. They're very useful. Like I said, you can make them for any level you want. They last forever. They're not going to rot like a wooden. So they're cheaper than buying real cross-country fence, and they don't rot and get damaged over time and weathering like a real cross-country fence. So if you can afford them, that is your best option. If you can't, we have corners that we make out of wooden rails. Like we get, which is really easy because you don't even have to get proper show jump rails. You can go to a hardware store. We've got short rails that are just rustic wood rails that you can buy at any of those stores. And we make a corner out of them with, 3 standards. And then we put something like a blue barrel or something in the middle. So for the baby horses, we can lie the barrel on its side. And for prelim and up, we can put the barrel upright in the middle of the corner. So that's one idea. Another idea, the guys went and got 2 flat slats and put them together like that and put brush in the middle, plastic brush sticking out. And then you just put them together and you got the brush sticking out. And again, that you can make as skinny as like a narrow out of it, or we have long ones that are 10 feet long. You put those on standards, then you throw a Liverpool in front of it and boom, you've got a ditch and brush. Or you can, like I said, make a skinny one and have a skinny. Dig a ditch. We've all done that. If you've got somebody that's really good with a tractor, we dug like a swale with a ditch at the bottom. So that makes a very, very tricky ditch because they have to go like a grob. They have to go down to it and jump out. And then again, you can take your rails and put one on top of it and make yourself a tricainer. Barrels for skinnies. Use a barrel, and then you probably have a broken pole somewhere that's like 4 foot wide. Put those. There's a skinny. Put two of them together. Now you got two skinnies, or So those are all kinds of. There's a ton of different things you can do to make at home cross country fences, if you will.
Be resourceful.
Yeah.
That's the takeaway. I was just reading through some of the questions that we got ahead of time, and a lot of them were kind of trying to get to specific exercises that you guys like to do. One of them specifically that I think is a good place to start is from a woman who said she's moving up from modified to prelim. And she was like, being at that level or kind of that transition, are there any exercises that you guys find useful for a pair that's kind of like, at that spot?
Well, I don't think there's any specific exercises. I think
it's so specific to
I think what you need to do is look at the prelim courses and look at what the questions the course designers are asking you these days. And those things are quite easy, to set up in your arena, quite honestly. If you're going prelim, you're stepping up to prelim, it's gonna start to get more technical. It's gonna start to get more narrow. And very often what starts to happen is, the technical questions, they're in a line. So very often what we're seeing is it's usually a bold question going into the line and often a technical question coming out of that line. And very often, more often than not, on a related distance. So it's easy to build an oxer, which is a bold question, with a corner at the end of that line, right? And whether that's on a straight line, whether it's on a bending line, that's a typical question that we usually see in prelim these days. And so it's really studying what the course designers are setting these days and making sure when you go out there that you've practiced a lot of those questions, so the horses understand them, quite honestly. I usually find, like as far as the water and the banks go, once horses have schooled those and they get secure and confident, which if you're moving up from modified to prelim, they should be. They should be really secure and confident about those questions and the ditches. They're not probably the biggest issue, except again, you're gonna see more sort of what I call, you're gonna get more of a combination with so the ditch could be rail, ditch, rail. Whereas at the other levels, you've got A and B instead of A, B, and C. The water might just be, just one element of the water, whereas at the prelim, you see it in training these days now as well. You see a jump in the water, and so it's not really about. any specific exercises. It's really about making sure you've ticked off the boxes. And what I would say for us, like when I'm at the competitions, I come away from the competitions and I'm like, that was a really good question that the course designer set there. And that probably is something we need to practice a little bit more, and set it up and practice it. No different to show jumping, right? Yeah, show jumping's about practicing the lines. And again, like, think about what the course designers are doing, what sort of distances are they setting, and make sure you can, you're able to practice those distances, because a lot of the technical stuff is related these days.
Yeah, I would say, to be more specific, for the modified to prelim, of course, there's always some exceptions, but most typically in a modified, you could have a small version of what Lesley was saying, the bold to the narrow or the bold to the technical, but they'll be typically set on 6-7 strides. Whereas at prelim, you're going to find them set at 4 to 5 strides typically. So that's what you got to take into account. And like Lesley said, build an ox or 4 bending strides to a corner, or a skinny, or a triple brush. That's what you're going to see in prelim that you're not going to see in the modified. And also, like he said, you're going to more often than not have a water-to-water fence, whereas the odd occasion we'll see that in training and modified, but not as often as you will in the prelim have a water-to-water jump.
That's really helpful and tangible advice. I love that. So when you guys have a green horse come into the barn and they haven't been introduced to cross country at all, how are you introducing them to water jumps?
Well, I think if it's a horse that hasn't been out on the cross country at all, I would certainly take it with another horse. A more experienced horse, not just another horse. Take it with an experienced horse, and you're first off, you're going to walk into that water, and I would let it follow. I would have it behind the experienced horse. The same with tackling, your first ditch. I think for a young horse or inexperienced horse that has never been cross country schooling, or has been, but it's still, in its early days, I think it is a huge advantage to have an experienced horse in front of it and let it have a lead. I think that's hugely beneficial.
Yeah, I think, like you said, you gotta keep remembering that what's so important for the young horse as you're training them is that they have fun, and you keep them as relaxed as possible, because at the end of the day, and as always, there are exceptions, but when you get down the road, a relaxed horse, a horse that can actually be relaxed and enjoy cross country, is a much better horse, a much nicer horse to ride, a horse that will probably make less mistakes, and you'll make less mistakes on, than the ones that are frantic and crazy and sweating and going mental coming out of the box. And that's got to start early, where they can go out there and trot around and have fun and follow their friends into water the first time. I mean, that's horsemanship. That's what horses do. They're herd animals. So let them follow the pack into the water. Let them follow the ditch. You see too many people out there trying to make these horses go into water, instead of, if they just had the first experience following their friends, there'd be none of that. And then you think, none of us like to learn something new under duress. We'd be much better learning it in a calm, relaxed, positive way. So I think, don't go out there for sure on your own the first time with a young horse. Even if, we wouldn't do that as professionals. There's no way we would do that. We'd always go out with other people ourselves. So you don't need to go out doing that, and always keep in mind that a relaxed horse is a horse you're going to enjoy much more in the future, and the horse is going to be happier.
That is a perfect segue to this. Oh, sorry, Kins. Go ahead.
Sorry, I had a follow up. Would you guys ever introduce a new question to a horse from the ground, like via lunging or just leading them in by hand?
That is something I don't do. No, not usually. It's not to say that
There's anything wrong.
there's anything wrong with it. I mean, I think it certainly has its advantages. I think, me personally has always done it from on top of the horse.
I think a lot of people too, like you see a lot of that, and there's nothing wrong with it, and it has advantages. But a lot of the famous people you see doing that, they're doing it because they don't ride. Like, not to mention names, but the famous event people that you see doing a lot of that with, they do not ride. So that is how they can get a young sales horse ready to go out. But we ride. We have other horses that are available to give young horses leads and such like that. So we don't really have a reason to do it that way. Not there's 100 ways to skin a cat, and none of them are wrong, but we can ride our horses, so that's why we do it our way.
Got it. That makes sense. And then, sorry, I have a million follow-ups. Apparently, there's a lot of questions here. So if you guys are introducing a horse to the water, you have a lead for it, or even a ditch, and the horse is just like not having it, is there any point where you stop and try again another day, or does the horse once you've asked, does the horse have to do it that day?
No, I think I was brought up, once you ask, you got to get it done. So I think we're going to get it done. And I think, quite honestly, if you've got a lead horse and you're not over facing them, I mean, you're going to get it done. I think you're only going to get into trouble with something like that is if you overface it, so make sure the ditch is something that the horse can literally almost just step across from a walk. But if you go down to a big wide ditch, and yes, you are going to encounter problems. But I think if you keep the steps small, keep when I say the steps, the training small enough in the very beginning, and you've got some help there, or you've got encouragement there, you're going to get it done. I think the only time you don't do that is if you overface it, basically.
I can honestly say, in like 20 whatever years, in all of the horses, we have never had one that would not follow into water. I mean, having never seen it before, and we've never had one that wouldn't step over a ditch. And I think if you have one that is doing that, there's one or two problems. Either, like Lesley said, you're asking too much and you got to scale it down, or you're dealing with a horse that has some serious baggage. They've had a bad experience before. Maybe not even to that exact thing, but they have had some kind of trauma before that they are not maybe willing to accept new things or accept new experiences or whatever. But if you take a raw, fresh horse like we usually have, we have never, ever, ever had one that would not follow into water or follow over a ditch. I mean, it's natural for them, quite honestly.
And I think the only other time that I've experienced problems there is with teaching or having somebody there,
People
with somebody else, and they really don't.
They don't want to jump the ditch.
Yeah, and then that's a real tough one, because once you start, you do need to get it done, but you've got to want to do it.
Yeah,
and
that's a good point.
I mean, if you don't want to do it, those are terrible vibes, and you are going to be unsuccessful. So you've got to be pretty you've got to be secure in yourself that this is something that you really want to do and get done as well.
That makes a lot of sense. It has to be hard to get into that situation, and everyone realizes that's the issue at hand. Because it's harder to overcome our things as riders probably than for horses to overcome them. We have somebody in chat who, on this topic, she said, what about ponying young horses, like yearlings or young ones that aren't under saddle yet? Do you ever do that?
No, we don't do that because, again, our facility is such that we're not we don't have enough. Our facility isn't big enough to start catering for yearlings and so forth. So the horses are coming into us are probably at the very earliest it would be a 3-year-old, but it's much more likely to always be 4-year-olds type of thing and up. So yeah, I mean that isn't that is, I mean, that's not to say, again, if you can't, if you're on the lead horse and you've got a green horse, and you've got somebody on the green horse, you can actually take a hold of the reins and pony them in that way for sure. I mean, there are, as Lesley said, there are lots of ways, and I think there isn't one set way to get this done. As you've already asked us other questions, like do you lunge over cross country fences? That's a great way to introduce horses to it. As we've answered tonight, we don't actually do that, and I think it depends on your facility and what your capabilities are, whether you ride or don't ride, and what level you ride to. I think I think with all these questions, there's a whole lot of things that come into as to how you do your thing.
Yeah. So one of our this is a great question because I had similar issues when I was back competing. One of our members wrote in and she says she can't get it out of her head that she's just afraid of corners. Do you guys have any tricks or tips that you teach your students on how to think about corners that makes them a little bit less just easier to tackle?
Well, I mean, again, if the rider has an issue with corners, I mean, again, make it achievable. Make sure it's achievable. And, like when we start off corners with the horses, obviously, as Lesley said, we use rails. And so that that corner can be 18 inches. It doesn't even hardly look like a corner, right? And then you build up to it. And so I think the same for a rider. You probably need to make it very achievable. But as far as when you're teaching riders or training riders, a corner originally, if you take a corner, and you there's an imaginary line that runs right down the middle of the corner, and then that is what you jump, that imaginary line. So you can actually take a corner, and you can you can run a rail down the middle if you want, and then that's what the rider has to jump perpendicular to, especially in the early days. Obviously, at the upper levels now, we're asked to jump corners from crazy angles, quite honestly. But that's a long way down the road. I think if the riders are concerned about running out, same with young horses, you put a guide rail on the side so that it teaches them to channel in, yeah. And for me, a rider has to practice being able to hold the line to the jump, and that line is usually about 4 to 5 feet in from the point, basically, yeah. So you have to look at that line, you have to see that line, and then you have to imagine it, and then when you come around, and then when you're riding it, you have to hold that line, because in the end, obviously, again, the corners get bigger and wider, you're jumping much nearer to the point. So the whole point of that is the training in the early days of starting to hold that line about 4 to 5 feet in from the point. And it's with like everything else with confidence, right? Practice helps that, but obviously it needs to be good practice. And though, you know, those are the things. Really make sure it's achievable. Think of that imaginary line down the middle. Think about jumping 4 to 5 feet in from the point. And, you know, and if you need a help, you know, put a guide rail on the end to begin with, right? And then that rail can lie on the floor, and then that rail can be taken away completely. And so it becomes a building block with really, which is anything to do with training of riders and horses.
Yeah, you're using your imagination a lot with those corners. I remember I pictured them as if they were a vertical, which obviously they weren't, but it helped me not be, you know, riding backwards because I was nervous about it as well. Okay, this is a question we got a bit back that I thought was interesting because you talked about how like happy, comfortable horses are the horses you want on cross country. And it sounds like this person is dealing with something a little different than that. She said, my horse gets super strong on cross country and ends up dragging me around. What's the best way to approach this in a schooling situation so I can avoid feeling like I'm on a runaway train once we're at a competition and on course?
Well, yeah, if horses, I mean, you know, if horses get strong, you again, when you're schooling, there's lots of, you know, you can jump the fence, ride a transition afterwards. Is that a transition back to walk? Or is it a transition back to halt? The adjustability, you know, if a horse is strong, it's all about the adjustability and making sure, or helping on teaching or getting the horse to understand to try and stay in balance, because usually the stronger a horse gets, the more downhill the balance is. So when you're schooling a horse like that, you know, it's going to be a lot of jumping fences and then riding a downward transition afterwards. Yeah. You know, and sometimes, yeah, it's, you know, with a strong horse, you just got, you know, you also have to make sure you aren't being strong back as well quite often. You know, I mean, there's probably the people on this tonight will probably not remember a lady called Lorna Clark, who rode on the British team. She was one of the most amazing British cross-country riders we had, and I remember her always saying, well, it takes two to pull. It's that easy.
That's great advice. I love that. And yeah, that's great just in general. So this next question is one of our members. She said she just bought a new property and it has a big field, but it doesn't have any cross country set up yet. Where would you recommend, or what types of jumps would you recommend she should prioritize as she builds out that cross country field, assuming that she has the ability to do anything? Are there jumps that you think that ideally every cross country field should include?
Well, I think
if the budget is endless, I would have a water for sure, and make sure when you the one thing I've seen that people do wrong when they do their own little backyard one is they make it too small, the water. It's got to be a little bit bigger, and it's got to be very inviting. I've seen people that make waters that almost look like big swimming pools, and those are awful. Horses hate them. So make sure it has a nice beach all around it, and it's big enough that it's very versatile. If you're going to do it, I'm sure it's not that much more expensive to make it a bit bigger. So go bigger on that. You need a variety of ditches. And not only a variety of ditches, but again, going with any expense doesn't matter. I'd have a variety of ditches on flat ground, and then I'd also have a nice ditch, like we said, that where the ground sloped down to it, because that's a whole other bottle of wax, you know, when you can build the ditches that have a slope down to them. And then a bank would be nice. And then aside from that, you bring in your big selection of portables. So you have, you know, every good cross country place needs a triple brush, because that's on every course now. They need the corners, they need the skinnies, and make them light enough and portable enough, or if not light, that they have the right skids on them so that you can be moving them frequently. So they're not just stuck in one place and it's hard to move them around. Anything else you put up there?
Yeah, and I think it depends again what you're trying to achieve, and you know, I think what would be great is, you know, what I've always thought is great to get young horses going is where you have 3 or 4 fences just in a straight line in a row. You know, whereas you go to cross country schooling places and the fences are dotted all around, and you know, you only get to jump one fence and then you have to sort of turn before you jump another fence. And I think a great way to get young horses going is to have, like I said, 3 or 4 fences in a nice long straight line where you can just keep galloping up them, and the horses, they jump one and then they get going, and then they, you know, there's another one, and then you get going, and then there's another one. And I think that's a really good way to get young horses going forward. You know, like I said, years back, or you know, when I was back in England, you'd have out hunting, you'd have, you know, you'd pick up the gallop and there'd be 5 hedges in a row. And by the time you got to the 5th one, if you got to the 5th one, they were starting to go really well.
That's so much fun. Okay, so our next question is from one of our members. She's saying, do you have any tips for a rider trying to learn how to gallop fences?
Well, I just did.
Yeah. So what we'll often do, even if you don't have the biggest property, we take, you know, those jump for joy brush fences, so just like little coops with a little brush on the back, and we plop them out in our backyard on a place where there is enough room in a straight line. We don't know what the distance is, you know, it might be 20, 30 strides or 15 strides, whatever, and we put them in a straight line, and then we go to the end of the field and we pick up the canter and off we go. And we make, you know, so the jumps are attractive enough that, you know, they're not upright, they're coops with brush on them, so you don't have to go down there, and our kids don't have to go down there worried about the perfect distance. You know, they're very friendly even if you make a mistake, and you jump the one and then you get back up in your stirrups and go on to the next one, and it's great for the riders, and it's actually really good for the horses too.
Yeah, that's great advice. All right, one question that we have in chat. She said, I need help experimenting with a new bit for cross country. I'm in an egg butt snaffle for the other 2 phases, but I don't feel like I have the control or steering that I'd like at speed or out in the open. I know I should be trying others while cross country schooling, but I don't know exactly what to do to tell whether the one that I'm trying is a good fit.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think we all come across it, and it is experimenting, because you have to, you do have to experiment, and quite honestly, sometimes what can be perhaps like seems to work really well schooling can then sometimes not enough out on the cross country course itself, and vice versa. If it feels too much when you're actually schooling, sometimes that actually works really well when you're out there in the competition itself. And so I don't think until you're out there and you're using what you want to use, until you're actually out there in the competition, you don't really know. whether it's the right bit or not, quite honestly. And so, that's can be hard, right? Because how many times do you compete? But at the same time, I think you got to, if you're experiencing these issues, you do have to make sure you leave yourself enough time to work it out in competition itself, that especially if you're heading, say, you're heading for a 3-day or something like that, you obviously want to have it right by the time you get there. But I don't think there's one answer, and I do think you do have to experiment to find the right bit.
And if it helps, I would say to her that 75% of our horses we go through this with, like, it's normal and it's hard, and you think you have to, like Lesley said, you have to experiment, and it's so difficult because you'll often find that one is, like you said, too much at home, too much for schooling, but then you find out it's the perfect bit, and then the one that you think, oh my gosh, I'm not schooling and this is perfect, and then you get run away with at the show. So, but I will tell her that it's not it's common. Like, we go through this with 75%, and Lesley has adult horses now competing at high levels where he still will go vacillate, even depending on the time of year, between one bit and the other bit. So it's not so easy all the time, no, but the only way to do it is to experiment.
Yeah. So this next question is, we are increasingly seeing wildly decorated and carved fences on cross country. How do you prepare your horse for that? And she gave the example of the crab going into the water at Maryland. Is that more of like to make the rider afraid, or is that something you really have to prep your horse for?
I don't think, I'm not sure how much the horses are affected by that kind of thing, quite honestly. I think it's probably more in our head more than what the horse says, quite honestly. I don't think there's a horse that comes round the turn to the Maryland crab and goes, oh my God, that's a Maryland crab. I think they see a piece of wood with color on it, perhaps, right? So, and again, I mean, we are seeing more and more of them, and even at the lower levels, right? And so I think when you start off at the lower levels, and they're nice, everything's nice and small type of thing, that's the whole point of doing the lower levels, for when you're producing horses, is to give them an introduction to everything that eventually is going to get bigger and more difficult. But the idea is, as it gets bigger and more difficult, they've met these challenges along the way that have been much more simplified. So they're then accustomed to that, and then it's so then when you do get to Maryland and you've got that crab, it looks nice for the spectators.
Yeah, I think the only reason why the course designers are doing that is so they get photographed and put it, oh my God, look at this, and it's probably fun, I would think, if I was a jump builder, to do something like that. But I don't really think the horses care less, quite honestly.
But they look great.
Yeah, I mean, it's for the spectators, and so they get photographed and put on Eventing Nation or wherever. It's for the media. It's not a bother to the horses.
They're awesome.
Sorry, go ahead, Lesley.
I said no. They make great fences, but I mean, I don't think the horses are really affected by them. But yeah, like Lesley said, I'm sure if you're a jump builder, I mean, it must be fun to do something like that, right?
Then just a log.
Yeah. Yeah.
Totally, it's fun for all of us.
And some of those guys, some of those guys, what they do now, it's fantastic.
Artwork.
It's brilliant.
It is really cool. Yeah, kudos to everyone thinking up those things and making them happen for all of our entertainment and discussion. All right, so this question is a little bit, it will depend on the horse a bit, but I am thinking there might be kind of a middle of the road answer. For not schooling us, for warming up for cross country at a competition. So we're in parallel to the topic, but not exactly in the topic. Is there a typical schooling or warm up that you like to do prior to a cross country course? Let's say at like training level and up. Like, what are you aiming for time wise? If it's not a very, unique horse, what are you aiming for number of jumps wise? What makes you feel like you're ready to go in the start box?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it is relative to the horse. If you've got a good, if you've got a bold horse on the cross country and an experienced horse, they, I mean, 8-10 jumps should do it. And I mean, and then obviously if you've got a greener horse or a lesser experienced horse, you want to start off with the smaller ones and make sure they're drawing you down to that type of thing. And so you might have to jump those smaller ones 3 or 4 times, so that the horse gets it gets to go take itself forward down to those fences type of thing. And then once it's done that, you can move up and jump something a bit bigger. But those horses are obviously going to have to jump more jumps. And then again, in the lower levels, that's really what the warm up is for in that horse, is making sure that they're in front of your leg and they're traveling forward and drawing down to the jump, a lot of it by themselves type of thing. And so as you jump more fences, they should start to do that. The older horses, like I said, the older horses and the bolder horses, I don't need to jump so many jumps, but I obviously need to angle something in the warm up, because you're going to have that on your course. In the higher level up you go, you're going to have angled jumps. So you need to make sure you can angle across something and they're holding their line. The lower divisions, really, you should be jumping all the fences on a straight line. There shouldn't really be any angles, quite honestly. So, and then I do like once I like to allow myself, when I warm up for cross country, I like to warm up, and then I do want to leave myself enough time to allow the horses to catch their breath before they go out on the cross country. I'm not one who likes to jump fences and then go straight over to the start box and go out. I think I like the horses to have a walk around and be allowed to recover from that a little bit. And as Lesley said, make sure they've mentally come down again and a little bit relaxed before they go out on the course. And so then I would probably just jump one more jump before I go over to the start box, having let them have that recovery period.
Yeah, I love that approach. So we're here on the hour, but before we let you guys go, and I know you have to go because you have a dinner, but do both of you, and you can say no if this is not a fun question, do both of you have a favorite jump on cross country and a least favorite jump on cross country?
I'll let you go first.
I don't love, for sure, my least favorite jump would be like a big upright square table in the middle of a field. But luckily, so part of the reason why I don't like that is because I sit on all the safety committees, and I know that they're statistically the most dangerous jump. But I will say these days we're actually not seeing many of those, and that's very nice. Thanks to all the committees and thanks to all the course designers and builders doing their jobs. We're seeing a lot more tables that are either frangible or they have a sloping front face. So the good news is that those scary tables are not so much in existence. And the other thing too is the course designers are often now putting them off turns, which makes a huge difference as well. So you actually don't see many more of my scary fences anymore. And then as far as favorite fences, weirdly enough, like I love technical fences. I've always been good at them, and I love, so give me, a coffin or a water or a something like that technical, because I feel like I'm good at those. So that's what my favorites are.
So my least favorite depends what I'm sat on.
Yeah.
That's what I would say there. If you've got a horse that
Is ditchy.
is ditchy, then
The big ditching wall is not very nice.
but if you've got a horse that's nice and bold and stuff, those fences are absolutely fabulous to jump and just such great fun. In the same way, if you've got a horse that tends to glance off something, obviously the narrow technical fences are going to be your least favorite jumps on that course, quite honestly. And then I would say my favorite jump is the last one.
I was waiting for you to say that. That's awesome. I love that. Great answers, guys. That was so much fun. And I learned a ton during this hour, so I know our members did. Thank you guys so much. We really appreciate you taking the time and always sharing your expertise with Ride IQ.